Hi. So, for those of you who do need an introduction because they don't know who I am, my name is Rami Ismail. I'm an independent game developer. I've been making games for the past 15 years. I used to run a game studio called Vlambeer, which was an independent game studio in the Netherlands. It was officially founded back in 2010. Our first title was called Super Crate Box, which was nominated for some of the largest awards in the games industry for its game design. After that, we kind of had to make money because I was a university dropout, and yeah, that's not a good job. So started making some more games. We were one of the earlier iOS titles. Ridiculous Fishing won the Apple Design Award back in 2013, and also Apple Game of the Year. From there, we moved into console, which back in the days wasn't really a thing that independent developers did. So we did a game called Luftrausers for PlayStation. And then after that, I worked on Nuclear Throne. Nuclear Throne was probably our biggest game. It came out on 7 platforms, including Xbox, Switch, PlayStation, every PC platform. We also made some games for consoles that are now dead, including the Ouya. Anybody who has ever heard of that? All 4 of you, congratulations. You know obscure video games information. So yeah, I've been around a bit for the past few years. We shut down Vlambeer back in 2020, mostly because I wanted to make bigger things and my co-founder wanted to continue to make small things. Both of those are super fine, like not judging. I love what JW is doing. But we just kind of wanted to go in different directions, so we shut the studio down. Since then, I've mostly been helping other game studios. So a kind of accident that happened in my career is I was originally a programmer. Been programming since I was, 6 years old, probably. Yeah, obviously that was not very good code when I started. It started with QBasic way in the days with Gorillas.bas, for any of you who were around for that one. It was a tutorial file for one of the basic programming languages that was available on MS-DOS. And that was the first game I ever played, was Gorillas. Gorillas was wonderful, but one day I got curious about what would happen if I would change the text that would show up on my screen before I could play the game. So I changed the words Microsoft Gorillas to Rami Ismail. I ran the game, and now the game said my name. And that was it. For the rest of my life, I wanted to change words to change games. So I chased that for the next 15 years, went to Game Design University, dropped out, and started Vlambeer. So I didn't really expect to also be the business person at Vlambeer, but it turned out my co-founder was not very good at business. So between me or him, it had to be me. And that led to me also giving a lot of talks. And in doing that, I started getting invitations to go to countries far away, Indonesia, Uruguay, places like that, to talk about game development. And as I'm half Egyptian and was kind of upset that I didn't really see game development in Egypt, I decided to go to all those places. So when our first hit game came out, Ridiculous Fishing, I spent some of that money to go visit game developers everywhere. So for the past 10 years, I've also been working on my mission of making game development more accessible for people worldwide. And as part of that, I help a lot of studios, consult with a lot of studios, and basically help with everything from tiny indie games in faraway countries to big triple or even quadruple A nowadays video games. I hate the phrase quadruple A, but the industry went with it, so we're doing it, I guess. I also make a lot of tools for independent developers, including Presskit, Distribute, a bunch of others. I run a games conference called GameDev.world, which is happening actually again in December this year. 32 online talks in 8 different languages. We'll live translate all of them for you, so you can watch game programming talks in probably like Hindi or something, or Japanese or Chinese or Arabic. I used to run a panel called One Reason to Be, which was mostly about bringing game developers from everywhere around the world together, and I write a newsletter called Leveling the Playing Field. I also tweet too much, although the word tweet is now outdated, I guess. I X too much. Oh shit. I'm going to restart this presentation real quick to see if I can actually fix this one. Because I have a lot of things I want to talk to you about, but I do want to make sure that I don't miss some of the questions I already got outside, and I wrote some notes about those. Grew up a programmer. Just to give you a bit of a background on me, I wrote QBasic first, then HTML, then I used some proprietary language called DarkBasic, which literally nobody in this room has heard of, right? Absolutely zero. Amazing. JavaScript, C#, Objective-C, C++, kind of went through all of those. And I've used GameMaker, Unity, and Unreal, kind of the three of the bigger engines in game development that are publicly available, that are not proprietary. And I want to talk today a bit about game dev for software engineers, or how I learned to stop earning as much to make cooler things more people will yell at me about. That is probably the best description I can give you for game development. For those of you who want to be in games and don't really know about the context of games, it's not the easiest career path if you're a software engineer. Like, if you want something that is stable and somewhat sane, go into banking or something, makes more money, more holidays. What I found in talking to game developers everywhere is that the people that are in games, they really want to be in games. And that doesn't mean that you should just accept a whole lot of nonsense, because there is a whole lot of nonsense. There's actually a lot of improvement in the industry right now, in terms of labor rights. But it is kind of a weird job, because gamers are notoriously kind of unhappy with things. So even if you make a really good game and you change the balance of a weapon, you'll get yelled at. That's just kind of part of it. And I do always want to sort of like warn people that are not in games for those kind of things. If you want to be in games, like, make sure you want to be in games, and then you'll find a really fulfilling career there if things work out. I also want to give a little bit of context on the three different types of game development, because there are actually 3 or 4 different industries that fall under the phrase games industry. You've got your AAA game development and quadruple A. You've got your indie development, and you've got mobile VR. They're all kind of their own space. They all work differently. They all fund differently. They all build their teams differently. They approach games differently. And the basics of what I want to talk about apply to all. But, if you go and look at like the blockbuster games, the Call of Duties, the Grand Theft Autos, a job in engineering in a game studio like that is going to look a lot more like traditional software engineering. Well, if you go and join an indie studio, it's going to be a lot more creative coding. And if you're going to join a mobile or VR studio, it's going to feel a lot like being in a tech startup, because things need to move very fast. So that's kind of a generalization. I don't have time to fully go into all of them, but I do want to point out that there's actually different career paths, different attitudes, different sort of styles of game development in there. And game development really is kind of its own little world. I work with a lot of people that are new to game development, right? And in my work with a lot of studios, I also help with hiring. I help with people sourcing their first team. And one of the things I've really noticed, especially in countries where there is not a lot of game development, is when you hire software engineers from outside of games into games, there's actually quite a number of things that just don't work the way you'd expect, or that are incredibly different from traditional software development. And often when software engineers get to game dev, they have this moment of just utter shock at how game development works, at how we program and how we approach a lot of things in games, and how different it is from their more traditional software engineering background. So I kind of want to talk through the biggest 4 differences that I often come across, and sort of ways to mitigate them or ways to practice for them. And I want to talk a bit about why those things are different that way. And one thing I do want to emphasize as well is that just kind of nobody is good at game development. And that's mostly because game development keeps changing. If you talk to somebody who was really good at game dev 2 years ago and they weren't away for 6 months, they're probably not going to be quite where they used to be, and things might have shifted. For example, if you were a really good Unity programmer, then until yesterday, your job was looking pretty good. And today, it looks like there might be less job opportunity for you than 2 days ago, because Unity just announced a big change in their business model that is getting a lot of developers to move away from Unity. I have like 40 of them in my DMs. So, you know, like things change really, really rapidly. The ways we program, approach things, the things that are popular, the systems we integrate with, the consoles we work with, the platforms we work with, they're continuously changing. And because of that, literally nothing is standardized. There are no standards in game development. There's no agreement on anything. We don't even agree on our job titles. If you have a producer in one company, that might mean something completely different than a producer in another company. Engineering roles are like vaguely defined. What a senior versus a junior is different in every studio. The way we set up code, the way we integrate our tools, asset pipelines, all of those are unique per studio. And it means that every time you join anywhere, every time you hop from one place to another, there's going to be a period of learning. Every person is dependent on the team, on the context, on the situation of game development as is. So, you know, my last commercial title that I was a programming lead on was Nuclear Throne. That wrapped up in 2016. I've been consulting on a lot of games. I've been programming on a lot of games since. But if you had me lead a game right now, I'd probably get some help to make sure that I'm not doing anything that is particularly outdated. Setting up your structure, setting up sort of like rendering, all of that. Things change really rapidly. So nobody's good at game development. And if they are, they're not for long. And then I do want to go through those four differences, because I think in some parts that's true about software engineering, right? Like things change super fast all the time. It's just in games, everything is changing all the time. So game development is very much creative programming. And that means that when you start on a games project, a lot of people think that what you get is like a game design document, right? A document that lays out how the game is going to work, what it's going to do. And that's true. We usually do write something that says how the game is going to work. And then usually within a month or two, we've discarded most of it because it doesn't work. Or it doesn't work the way we want to. Or there are ways that we found during development that are better or more interesting. Certain mechanics might not work. We have a saying in the games industry that says, the writer will fix it. And the writer will fix it effectively means that, you know, you get a writer to write a story. Then you make the video game. Then it turns out 3 weeks before launch that level 6 is not going to make it before launch. And you go to the writer and you go like, okay, we're losing level 6, so everything that happened in that now needs to happen in the other levels. And we only have the voice actor lines that we've already recorded. So good luck with that, right? So the joke of that is that we hope that the writer will fix it. In reality, the programmer is also fixing it, because we now have to deal with a bunch of stuff that just isn't there. Things need to be implemented in ways that weren't necessary before. We might need a narrator at some point on a black screen, but the way we do audio mostly means that we have some sort of character controller, so probably put an invisible character somewhere. I've heard incredible solutions to really silly problems. There was a physics bug in a really big AAA game where every object in the entire game started floating, you know, like a few pixels above the ground on runtime. And it was only in one level. And they could not figure out what it was. So they thought, okay, we'll raise the level. But that raised everything else up further. And they couldn't quite figure out what the problem was. And so the problem with that was that as soon as the game loaded, the physics runtime would take all the objects and drop them. That wasn't great. But on top of that, as soon as they hit the ground, it would trigger a sound effect for everything within range, which was hundreds of objects hitting the ground. So it would the game would kind of start, stutter, fart at you, because that was the only way to describe a sound engine playing 100 sounds at once. And then after 4 to 8 seconds, start running again. And so they couldn't quite figure out what to do with this level. It was an amazing level. It started with this big epic helicopter crash, and then you would, you know, go into the level and like, but now it was a big helicopter crash, a stutter, a fart, and then the game would start. So they got their teams together to fix it, and the programmer that actually solved it had the most beautiful solve I've ever seen in my life. It starts with a helicopter crash. So they went, what if the character just blacks out? So what they did is they killed the audio, they left the screen black, and then after the stutter completed, after they could confirm that all the objects were on the ground, they played a low ringing noise, like a mee, as if you were like coming back from the helicopter crash, and then just ran the game. They never fixed it, but nobody noticed, because it was just this epic, tense moment after the helicopter crash. That's game development. Game development is not necessarily about writing the best code. It's not about building the best structure. Yes, you want to do those as much as possible. But the as possible part in game development is far more important than anything else, because there are so many moving pieces. It's not just the programmers. No, it's also the artists, it's the musicians, it's the sound designers, the writers, the designers. All of them are dependent on being able to test things in the build. So a lot of this is writing code, pivoting, adjusting, throwing out stuff. And ironically, the smaller the game is, the more that is true. The bigger the game is, the more structured you're going to get, because the risks are just larger. If you have 500 people waiting for a thing, that's a different situation than if you have 4 people waiting for a thing. So game development really is a moving target. And with that, obviously, it's also kind of its own coding style, where a lot of more traditional software engineers approach coding from a fairly traditional perspective, like set up what we're doing, figure out how we're doing it, set up the base structure, start writing code. I don't think I've ever seen a shipped game that has nice code. I just don't. Like, some of the biggest titles of the year have bugs that go back 15 years that they just accepted are better to leave in than to try and fix them, right? There's a famous story of one of the biggest games companies having a line of code in their, like, just their main constructor that they don't know what it does. And they've just figured that we'll just leave it that way because it also doesn't break anything, and removing it does. So why fix it? They just don't. And those things are actually true. Depending on what field you come from, game development might look actually terrifying. I have a dear friend who was a former NASA engineer, and her approach to game development was very structural, very like, okay, we're going to get code review, let's make sure quality is good. Like, every line of code that goes onto a satellite has to be checked over and over and over again, because there's usually not a good way of patching a thing that is like a million miles away. In game development, even if we couldn't patch, we just want to ship it anyway, because like, game needs to get done, right? It does change how you approach things. Game developers write their code with the assumption that entire systems might just get thrown out. That this is not going to ship. That this thing that is you have dependencies that are critical to systems working is actually kind of risky for a lot of systems. So you'll see that a lot of developers are a lot more granular about what systems they make reusable or what systems they sort of pull out of their code structure than in a lot of traditional software engineering. So in this game, how many of you know this image, by the way? Okay, it's another one of my favorite stories. In this video game, the developers wanted a train that the player could get into, and they wanted the train to move around. The problem is they never coded any vehicle class, so there was no vehicle, and they didn't really have a lot of time. So they got together and they said, well, what if we make an exception to our character class and we just allow them to wear a train as a hat? And then we make an exception to the class and make the character be underground as big as the tram, as the character is. And that's how all the trams in this game work. And nobody would have ever known if nobody was modding the game and finding out that this is actually how it works. The beauty of games is that we're basically magicians. It's smoke and mirrors, right? Everybody knows it's not true, but everybody wants it to be true. So we all just kind of accept it. So if you're in games, a lot of problems that you're going to be solving are very multidisciplinary, right? I'm going to put this image back just because I think it's better. It's very multidisciplinary. A lot of problems that you would normally try to fix with engineering are better or more efficiently fixed without it. Like this one. You could absolutely have coded a full vehicle class that would do the work perfectly. But this is faster, it took 5 minutes. So why would you waste a week making a vehicle class, right? Especially on smaller teams, your ability to communicate with other teams, to find good solutions to problems, is going to be a skill that tends to have to be trained a lot, right? So say you're working with an artist. I can guarantee you that an artist in general talks very differently about the world than a programmer. Now, again, generalizing here, really generalizing. But in general, artists are more talk more about feelings, about mood, about atmosphere, about those kind of things. Programmers tend to be a little bit more structured in their thinking, a little bit more logical. The beauty of game development is that we get all these different people together and solve a problem together. But if you try to convince an artist of something, that you need something, and you explain it like a programmer, I can guarantee you're not going to get it, right? And if a producer comes to us and asks us for a schedule, they're also not going to get it. Programmers, I'm so sorry, but in game development, I can guarantee you, we all are the worst schedulers of anybody in game development. Because somebody will ask, how long does this take to fix? And we'll say, it'll take 2 days, it'll take 2 months. Somebody will ask us how long it will take to fix. We'll say 2 months, will be done in 20 minutes. We have no idea. We're guessing, right? That's the best we have. So learning to communicate with people in different disciplines is a really big part of this. And there's not really a way to train this. I don't know. Like, I remember the designer on one of my projects coming to me and going like, okay, but when these two things collide, they need more like oomph. How do I program oomph? I don't know. Like, I have no idea. And then I have to sit down with this designer and go, okay, listen, I need a little bit more like what is oomph? How does oomph work? And they go, well, it's like. And sometimes that's what you have to work with, right? The same way when an artist comes to you and goes like, I want the effect to be a little bit more wispy. Or a sound designer that goes like, I want it to be more rumbly. It's like, great, awesome. Let me figure out what you actually mean and then come back to you. And very often the solution is just to try and speak in their language. So if a sound designer comes to you and goes like, I want it to be more rumbly, just ask them like, can you make the sound with your mouth? They're like, well, now it's like, and I went like, and they were like, oh. So just, you know, we need a little bit of like vibration on the sound effect. You just want to extend it. Can't you just do that in the sound effect? And we're like, yeah, I guess. And then they do it. Problem fixed, right? Conversely, it's also really important to be able to communicate on the business side of things, right? To be able to expand what timelines are, but also what the risk to timelines are. To us, very often it might seem obvious that a programming task takes a certain amount of time, but might take longer, bug fixing, stuff like that. But we're also really bad at explaining it jargon-free. Like, we're really good at going like, oh yeah, we have this issue, and then just like going in depth as to what the issue is. The producer doesn't give it. The producer doesn't care. So they just need to know how long it's going to take to fix it, right? And what the risks are to the timeline. Those two skills, communicating across disciplines and communicating without jargon, are actually some of the biggest obstacles to software engineering getting in games. It's not the hard skills. I'm sure all of you are capable engineers. All of you can program. It's the ability to work in a multidisciplinary team that cuts out like 50% of people that come from outside of games just right on the bat, right? And then finally, if there was a third panel here that said good game development code, it would just be the second image again, right? Game development really needs you to forgive yourself for terrible code crimes, especially near the start of projects. Now, obviously, at the end of the project, you want to ship something solid. You need to be able to maintain it. You need to be able to pass it on to new people. You need to be able to work with other people on it. The bigger the team is, the more true this is. But at the start of a project, especially with indie teams, but also in larger teams, prototyping is a very important part of development. And prototyping is effectively the designer going, I don't know. Why don't we try this? And one of the biggest problems I see with programmers is that we're too proud of our code. That we want it to be right, that we want it to be modular, we want it to be, we want to be able to reuse stuff. Here's my one quick pro tip. For if you ever want to work on the start of a project as a prototype engineer, as a systems engineer, as a gameplay engineer, if you ever want to touch sort of like the design side from an engineering position, is learn to write code that will make you cry. That's genuinely the tip. Like, I am not kidding. There is no joke here. If you make a prototype, the goal is to quickly prove the thing that is a question. And unless that question is an engineering question, it's likely a design question, an art question, a rendering question, whatever question it is. The fastest, cheapest way of getting there is the best way of getting there. Because it gives you more loops at trying whether the thing works. And the more often we get to try, the better the thing will be. Right? So it is really, really important that you learn to write code that is not for shipping. That is just for internal use. Now, if after all of those things you're still in, there's a lot of options for engineering in games. There's actually a lot of paths. It's not just one task. You can go into prototyping, systems, gameplay, graphics, shader programming like HLSL. You can go into tools if you're a bit familiar with WPF. You can AI, A-star, whatever. You know, we don't mean generative AI in games at the moment all that much, like gameplay AI. There's a ton of different ways to get into game development and work in games, no matter what your specialization is. If you are considering one of these three, sort of your major skills or advantages that can really strongly help you as you go per category, sort of laid out. If you're indie, C# is usually a pretty good programming language to be indie with, or Objective-C. C++, not as common in Unreal, but it happens. Prototype and communication. Being able to take lead on like version control, source control, like being able to implement that, explain that, teach your designer how to merge something or how to pull something or push something. It's great. For mobile, a lot of ad tech payment libraries, databases, stuff like that. And AAA, really, you just need to specialize. Just pick a thing and be really good at it, right? Those are kind of your main ways. If you're not in game development, go jam. If you want to be a games programmer, go participate in game jams. And one thing that I often hear is, well, I can't do art. Well, neither could the people that made this. All of this is this is just code. There's as far as I know, there's not a single asset in this. They just didn't know how to make art, so they learned how to code art. Because we're programmers, and if there's a problem, fix it. So don't worry too much about the things you're not good at. Since game development is kind of unique, we tend to not hire people without proven games experience. That doesn't mean you have to have worked on Call of Duty. It means that you have to have worked on games. And game jams, like the Global Game Jam, like Ludum Dare, like many of the other game jams that do exist, are a really good way of sort of like getting into that multidisciplinary working with small teams. Almost every game jam needs more programmers. So just go find one, participate, find a team, make a game. Keep track of what you did, how you solve problems, because when it comes time to do a portfolio review or something, that's what people are going to be looking for. Final thoughts. If you're going to apply at larger studios, we have a lot of tendency to ask impossible stuff in our job descriptions, like, 3 years of experience, 5 ship titles or something. If you mostly fit the profile of what they're asking for, just ignore that. Just apply. A lot of game studios just put that there to filter out, the 16-year-old student that has written one game in RPG Maker. RPG Maker is great, by the way. Nothing against RPG Maker. I love RPG Maker. But if you don't have to hit all requirements. If you hit most requirements, that's generally good enough. In AAA at the moment, most of the jobs that are there require senior level experience, which means that you also need to be somewhat familiar with leadership and managing teams, setting problems instead of just solving problems. If you happen to be between two disciplines, that helps a lot. So if you're a technical artist, somebody who's good at both art and programming, or a technical designer, somebody who's both an experienced designer and a programmer, those are actually fairly sought after. So if you are on that cutting edge, do consider the games industry. Like I said, it's not super standardized, so just expect that you're going to get in there, get some questions that you know don't know the answer to. If your answer is, you know what, let me look into that, I'll get back to you tomorrow, that's a fairly good answer. Like, I'll learn, effectively. And if you do have existing software experience, it really helps to emphasize the team size of projects you've worked on. Like if you've worked on a team with like 40 people and you've had a semi-leadership role in that, we do want to know, right? So team size, your role, your task, how you approach the problem. With that, I think I'm out of time. Based on I am out of time. I do have time for questions and stuff. Cool. I do have time for questions. If you have any more specific questions than the things I've talked about here, please do let me know as well. And thanks so much for listening.